The morning sun barely touched the towers of Windsor Castle when Security Officer James Mitchell began his routine patrol. He had worked for the Royal Protection Command for 12 years, and nothing ever surprised him anymore. Or so he thought. That Tuesday morning in early spring would change everything he believed about his predictable job. James was checking the vehicles in the secured parking area when he noticed something unusual. One of the Range Rovers assigned to the Duchess of Cornwall sat at an odd angle. The front tire looked slightly deflated, which was strange because all royal vehicles underwent daily inspections. He approached the black SUV with its tinted windows and royal insignia on the doors. As he walked around the vehicle, his trained eyes caught something that made him stop. There was a small scratch near the dashboard panel, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. James had seen this kind of mark before during his training about vehicle tampering. His heart rate picked up slightly. This could be nothing or it could be serious. He radioed his supervisor, Chief Inspector Sarah Brennan. She arrived within minutes, her face showing concern. Sarah had been in royal security for 20 years and had seen everything from protest attempts to genuine security threats. She trusted James's instincts completely. They decided to conduct a thorough inspection of the vehicle before it was used for the day's scheduled events. The Duchess had 3 appointments planned, including a visit to a children's hospital and a meeting with charity representatives. The vehicle needed to be absolutely safe. James opened the door carefully and began his systematic check. Everything seemed normal at first. The leather seats were pristine, the floor mats were clean, and the usual items were in their places. A bottle of water, some documents in a folder, and a pair of sunglasses rested on the passenger seat. Nothing appeared out of place, but James couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had learned over the years to trust his gut instinct. That small scratch on the dashboard panel kept bothering him. Why would there be a fresh scratch on a vehicle that was kept in such perfect condition? He reached for his inspection tools and began examining the dashboard more closely. The panel seemed slightly loose, which was definitely not normal for a vehicle maintained to royal standards. Sarah watched him work, her hand ready on her radio in case they needed to call for backup. James carefully applied pressure to different points on the dashboard. When he pressed near the scratch, he heard a small click. The panel moved slightly. His pulse quickened. This was not supposed to happen. Dashboard panels in royal vehicles were specially reinforced and sealed. They couldn't just come loose. Using a specialized tool, James began to carefully pry open the panel. Sarah stood beside him, her face growing more serious with each passing second. They both knew that if something dangerous was hidden in this vehicle, they had potentially stopped a major security incident. The panel came away slowly, revealing the space behind it. James shone his flashlight into the gap. What he saw made him freeze. There were items hidden in that space, items that absolutely should not be there. But these weren't weapons or explosives. What he discovered was something entirely different, something that would shake the foundations of royal protocol and trust. Sarah immediately called for a complete security lockdown of the area. Within minutes, senior security officials arrived on the scene. The vehicle was photographed from every angle. The hidden compartment behind the dashboard was documented carefully before anything was removed. James carefully extracted the items from the space. There were several sealed envelopes, a small recording device, and what appeared to be copies of private documents. The documents bore official stamps and signatures. Sarah's face went pale as she recognized some of the letterheads. These were confidential royal correspondence, documents that should never leave secure offices. The recording device was a sophisticated model, the kind used by intelligence services. It was still active, its small red light blinking steadily. Someone had planted this device to record conversations inside the vehicle. Every private discussion, every phone call, every confidential conversation that happened in this car had potentially been captured, but the envelopes were perhaps the most disturbing discovery. They were addressed to various media outlets and contained what appeared to be private photographs and detailed notes about royal family movements, schedules, and private activities. Someone with inside access had been collecting sensitive information and preparing to leak it to the press. The investigation shifted into high gear. Every person who had access to the vehicle was questioned. Maintenance records were pulled and examined. Security footage from the garage was reviewed frame by frame. The royal household was informed immediately, and additional security measures were put in place for all family members. James and Sarah were commended for their vigilance, but they felt no satisfaction. Someone they worked with, Someone trusted with the safety of the royal family had betrayed that trust. The question now was who and why. The investigation would reveal shocking truths about jealousy, ambition, and the dangerous game of royal secrets. As the day progressed, forensic experts arrived to process the vehicle completely. Every surface was dusted for fingerprints. The recording device was sent to technical specialists to extract its data. The documents were handed over to royal lawyers and security chiefs. What started as a routine morning patrol had uncovered a conspiracy that reached deeper into the royal household than anyone had imagined. The Duchess's schedule was immediately cleared. Alternative transportation was arranged and her security detail was doubled. Trust had been broken, and until the investigation was complete, everyone was a suspect. The palace released no statement to the press. This matter would be handled internally, quietly, as was the royal way. James returned to his station that evening exhausted but alert. He knew the coming days would bring more revelations. Somewhere in the staff someone was watching, someone who knew their plan had been discovered. The real investigation was just beginning, and the truth would prove to be more complicated than anyone expected. The investigation room at Windsor Castle Security Headquarters buzzed with activity. Detective Chief Inspector Robert Hayes had been called in from Scotland Yard to lead the inquiry. He was a specialist in internal security breaches and had handled sensitive cases involving government officials before. But this was his first royal assignment, and the pressure was immense. Robert spread out all the evidence on a large table. The envelopes, the recording device, the documents, and dozens of photographs taken of the vehicle and the hidden compartment. He studied each item carefully, looking for patterns and clues. His team of 6 investigators worked quietly around him, each assigned to different aspects of the case. The recording device was the first breakthrough. Technical experts had extracted its memory card and discovered over 3 months of audio recordings. Hours and hours of conversations, phone calls, and private discussions. Robert listened to some of the recordings with headphones, his face growing darker with each minute. The conversations were deeply personal. The Duchess speaking with her children, discussing family matters, sharing concerns about public appearances, and talking about her relationship with other royal family members. There were also recordings of security briefings, discussions about travel plans, and conversations about internal palace matters that should never be made public. But what troubled Robert most was the quality of the recordings. They were crystal clear. Whoever planted this device knew exactly where to place it for optimal audio capture. This person had technical knowledge and understood the layout of the vehicle perfectly. They also had regular access to plant and maintain the device. The maintenance logs showed that only 12 people had authorized access to the Duchess's vehicles. These included drivers, mechanics, security officers, and senior household staff. Each of these individuals had been vetted thoroughly when they were hired. They all had clean records and years of loyal service. Yet one of them was a traitor. Robert began conducting interviews. He set up a private room and called each person in one by one. He watched their body language, listened to their tone of voice, and noted their reactions to his questions. Most seemed genuinely shocked and horrified by the discovery, but a few showed signs of nervousness that caught his attention. Meanwhile, another investigator named Detective Lisa Chen was analyzing the documents found in the hidden compartment. These were photocopies of letters between the Duchess and various charities, personal notes from family members, and schedules for private events. Someone had been systematically copying confidential papers and storing them. Lisa noticed something interesting. All the documents had been copied on the same type of paper and using the same photocopier. The machine left a unique pattern on each copy like a fingerprint. She requested access to all photocopiers in the palace and began testing each one to find a match. By late afternoon, she had her answer. The copies were made on a machine in the administration office, a room that dozens of staff members used daily. However, security logs showed who accessed that room and when. Lisa cross-referenced the dates on the documents with the access logs. A pattern began to emerge. One name appeared repeatedly on days when documents were copied. Margaret Sinclair, a senior administrative assistant who had worked for the royal household for 15 years. She had impeccable references, a spotless record, and was known for her dedication and discretion. She handled sensitive correspondence and had access to almost every part of the palace administrative system. Robert immediately wanted to interview Margaret, but she wasn't at work that day. According to her supervisor, she had called in sick that morning, which was unusual because Margaret rarely took sick days. Robert felt his instincts kick in. The timing was too convenient. He dispatched 2 officers to Margaret's apartment in London. They were instructed to observe only and report back. If she tried to leave the country or destroy evidence, they would intervene. But for now, Robert wanted to gather more information before making any moves. Back at Windsor, James Mitchell was reviewing security footage with another investigator. They were looking at recordings from the secure garage over the past 6 months. The footage showed various staff members coming and going, performing their duties and accessing different vehicles. Everything seemed normal until James noticed something odd. On several occasions late at night after most staff had gone home, a figure appeared in the garage. The person wore a maintenance uniform and carried a toolbox. They approached the Duchess's vehicle and spent 10 to 15 minutes near it. The camera angles made it difficult to see exactly what they were doing, but the pattern was clear. James froze the image and tried to enhance it. The figure kept their face turned away from the cameras deliberately. They knew where the cameras were positioned and moved carefully to avoid clear identification. But they made one small mistake. In one frame, as they reached into the vehicle, their sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing a distinctive bracelet on their wrist. James recognized that bracelet immediately. It was a silver chain with small charms, each representing a different country. He had seen it many times because the person who wore it often talked about collecting the charms during travels. The bracelet belonged to Margaret Sinclair. Robert received this information while still at his desk reviewing interview notes. Everything was coming together. Margaret had the access, the knowledge, and apparently the motive. But what was her motive? Why would a trusted employee with 15 years of loyal service suddenly betray the royal family? The officers watching Margaret's apartment reported unusual activity. She had left her building twice, both times carrying bags to her car. She appeared nervous, constantly looking around as if checking whether she was being followed. On her second trip, she drove to a post office and mailed a package. The officers noted the details and called it in. Robert made his decision. They had enough evidence to bring Margaret in for questioning. He coordinated with Scotland Yard to have her detained peacefully. They would approach her at her apartment early the next morning before she had a chance to flee or destroy more evidence. But that evening brought an unexpected development. Margaret's supervisor called Robert in a panic. She had received an email from Margaret, sent from an anonymous account. The email contained a confession of sorts, but it raised more questions than it answered. Margaret admitted to planting the recording device and copying documents, but she insisted she was not working alone. She claimed she was being blackmailed by someone with information that could destroy her life. She said she had no choice but to cooperate. The email ended with a cryptic message stating that the real conspiracy went much higher than anyone suspected. Robert read the email multiple times, analyzing every word. Was this a genuine confession, or an attempt to create confusion and misdirect the investigation? Was Margaret truly a victim, or was she playing a more sophisticated game? Either way, they needed to find her quickly and get answers. The investigation had taken a dramatic turn. What began as a hidden recording device had uncovered layers of deception, possible blackmail, and hints of a larger conspiracy. The next 24 hours would be crucial in unraveling the complete truth and protecting the royal family from further security breaches. The dawn broke cold and gray over London as Detective Robert Hayes assembled his team outside Margaret Sinclair's apartment building. 6 officers positioned themselves at different exits while Robert and Detective Lisa Chen approached the main entrance. They carried a warrant for her detention and hoped she would cooperate peacefully. The building manager let them in without fuss. He looked worried when they explained they were there on official royal security business. Margaret lived on the 4th floor in a modest 2-bedroom apartment. Her neighbors described her as quiet, polite, and very private. Nobody knew much about her personal life. Robert knocked firmly on the door. There was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time, and identified himself. Still nothing. He nodded to the officer with the master key, and they prepared to enter. The door swung open to reveal an apartment that looked like someone had left in a hurry. Drawers were pulled open, Clothes scattered across the bedroom floor, and papers littered the dining table. The computer was gone, along with what appeared to be files and personal documents, but Margaret herself was not there. She had fled sometime during the night. Lisa immediately called it in while Robert began searching the apartment for clues. In the kitchen trash, he found torn pieces of paper. He carefully collected them and laid them out on the table, piecing them together like a puzzle. They were printed emails, communications between Margaret and someone using the name The Collector. The emails were chilling. The Collector had detailed information about Margaret's past, things she had kept hidden for years. A financial scandal involving her late husband, a bankruptcy she had concealed during her royal household application, and photographs of her at locations she should not have been. The Collector had built a complete file on her vulnerabilities. The messages showed how Margaret had been trapped. First, there were subtle requests for harmless information. Then the demands escalated. Copy some documents. Install a small device. Provide schedules and movement details. Each time she complied, the Collector asked for more. When Margaret tried to refuse, she received threats to expose her secrets and destroy her career. Robert felt a mix of anger and sympathy. Margaret was clearly a victim of blackmail, but she had still committed serious crimes. She had endangered the royal family and violated every oath she had taken. Whatever her circumstances, she had to be found and stopped before more damage was done. The technical team traced Margaret's phone. She had kept it on, which was either careless or deliberate. The signal placed her at a train station in South London. Robert dispatched units immediately while he and Lisa drove there at high speed. The station was crowded with morning commuters. Officers in plain clothes spread throughout the building, watching for Margaret. Robert received her photograph on his phone and showed it to station staff. A ticket clerk remembered her. She had purchased a ticket to Dover, where she could catch a ferry to France. The train had already departed, but it made several stops before reaching Dover. Robert coordinated with transport police to intercept the train at the next station. They had perhaps 20 minutes before Margaret would arrive there. He prayed they could reach her in time. Meanwhile, back at Windsor Castle, Chief Inspector Sarah Brennan was briefing the Duchess on the investigation's progress. The conversation was difficult. The Duchess felt betrayed by someone she had trusted, someone who had been part of her daily life for years. She asked questions about Margaret's motives and whether there were other security breaches they should worry about. Sarah explained about the blackmail and how Margaret appeared to be working under duress. But she also emphasized that the investigation was far from over. The identity of the Collector remained unknown, and they had to assume this person still represented a threat to royal security. At the station, Robert and his team watched as the train pulled in. Passengers began disembarking and officers carefully scanned each face. Then Robert saw her. Margaret emerged from a middle carriage wearing dark glasses and a headscarf, carrying a small overnight bag. She looked exhausted and frightened. Two officers approached her from different directions. She saw them immediately and froze. For a moment, Robert thought she might run, but then her shoulders sagged in defeat. She dropped her bag and raised her hand slightly, a gesture of surrender. The officers took her gently by the arms and guided her to a waiting vehicle. At Scotland Yard, Margaret was taken to an interview room. Robert gave her time to compose herself before beginning the questioning. He offered her tea and explained that she had the right to legal counsel. Margaret shook her head. She wanted to talk. She wanted to tell her story. The confession took 3 hours. Margaret explained everything from the beginning. How the Collector had first contacted her 2 years ago, with a simple email asking about public royal schedules. How the requests had gradually become more invasive and dangerous. How she had tried to refuse but was threatened with exposure that would destroy her reputation and career. She described planting the recording device with trembling hands late one night in the garage. She explained how she copied documents whenever she could and passed them to the Collector through anonymous drop points around London. She had never met the Collector face to face. All communication was electronic and anonymous, but Margaret had one crucial piece of information. The Collector had made a mistake during one exchange. A payment had been transferred to a bank account Margaret used for the drop payments. The transaction metadata included a routing number that could potentially be traced. She had kept a record of it, hoping someday it might help her escape this nightmare. Robert immediately passed this information to the Financial Crimes Unit. Tracing international bank transfers was complex, but it was their best lead on the collector's identity. The investigation was moving into dangerous territory. Whoever the collector was, they had resources, technical skills, and a deep interest in royal family secrets. Margaret was formally charged with multiple security violations and breach of trust. However, Robert assured her that her cooperation would be noted. She had been a victim of blackmail, and that would be considered during sentencing, but she had still broken serious laws and would face consequences. As evening fell, Robert returned to Windsor to update the investigation team. They now had a better understanding of the conspiracy, but the most dangerous player remained hidden. The collector was still out there, still gathering intelligence and possibly working with others inside the royal household. Security protocols were immediately upgraded across all royal residences. New screening procedures were implemented for staff. All vehicles underwent comprehensive security sweeps. Computer systems were examined for unauthorized access. The royal family was briefed on enhanced personal security measures, but Robert knew they were in a race against time. The collector now knew their operation had been exposed. They would either disappear and abandon their plans, or they would accelerate whatever they were planning. Either scenario was dangerous. A cornered operative with inside knowledge of royal security was perhaps the most dangerous threat of all. The technical team worked through the night analyzing the bank routing number Margaret had provided. They traced it through several international accounts, each one designed to obscure the final destination. But financial investigators were skilled at following these trails. By morning, they had narrowed down the location to a private bank in Switzerland, known for serving wealthy clients who valued discretion above all else. Robert requested assistance from international law enforcement. Swiss authorities were notoriously protective of banking privacy, but crimes involving national security sometimes opened doors that normally remained closed. The process would take time, but they were finally closing in on the collector's identity. 3 days after Margaret's arrest, Detective Robert Hayes received the breakthrough he had been waiting for. Swiss authorities, working with international security agencies, had traced the bank account to a shell company registered in Luxembourg. From there, the trail led to a name that made everyone in the investigation freeze in disbelief. The account was controlled by Victor Hartley, a former royal correspondent who had covered the palace for nearly 2 decades. Victor had been a respected journalist known for his insider access and detailed reporting on royal family matters. He had retired 5 years ago, supposedly to write books about his experiences covering the monarchy. Robert immediately pulled Victor's file. The journalist had never been involved in any scandal during his career. He maintained good relationships with palace press officers and was considered trustworthy by the royal household. His retirement had been amicable, and he occasionally still attended royal events as a guest commentator for major broadcasts. But digging deeper revealed troubling details. Victor's finances showed significant debts accumulated in recent years. His book projects had not been commercially successful. He had made poor investments and was facing financial pressure. His comfortable retirement was turning into a struggle to maintain appearances. Detective Lisa Chen discovered something even more interesting. Victor had been working on a new book proposal about the modern royal family. Publishers had rejected it repeatedly, saying it lacked the insider revelations readers wanted. Victor needed exclusive, sensational material to secure a lucrative publishing deal. That material was exactly what he had been collecting through Margaret. Robert obtained a warrant to search Victor's home in a quiet neighborhood outside London. The house was a modest Victorian terrace, expensively decorated but showing signs of financial strain. Recent bills were overdue, and creditors' letters sat unopened on a desk. In Victor's home office, investigators found everything they needed: a sophisticated computer setup with encrypted files containing all the materials Margaret had provided, transcripts of the recording device conversations, organized folders with photographs, documents, and detailed notes about royal family members' private lives and schedules. But the most damning evidence was Victor's communication with multiple tabloid editors and publishers. He had been negotiating deals to sell different pieces of information to various outlets. Some emails discussed payments for exclusive stories. Others outlined plans for a sensational book release time to cause maximum publicity and damage. Victor was not at home when the police arrived. According to his neighbors, he had left the previous evening carrying luggage. Airport authorities were immediately alerted. Within an hour, they located him at Heathrow Airport, waiting for a flight to Spain. He was detained quietly before boarding. The interrogation revealed a man whose respect for the royal family had eroded over years of financial pressure and professional disappointment. Victor believed the monarchy owed him something for his years of positive coverage. When his books failed and his finances collapsed, he felt justified in exploiting his knowledge and contacts for profit. He had identified Margaret as vulnerable through casual conversations at palace events. He researched her background, discovered her hidden secrets, and approached her systematically. The blackmail was calculated and professional. He knew exactly how much pressure to apply and when to escalate his demands. Victor had planned to release the most damaging information gradually over several months. Each revelation would generate publicity for his book and payment from media outlets. The recording device would provide intimate conversations that no journalist could obtain through legitimate means. It was a scheme worth potentially millions of pounds. What Victor had not anticipated was the vigilance of Security Officer James Mitchell and the thorough investigation that would follow. His carefully constructed plan had collapsed because of one observant guard noticing a small scratch on a dashboard panel. As Victor's full confession emerged, Robert realized the investigation was not completely finished. Victor had mentioned in passing that he was not the only person interested in royal family information. There was a network of journalists, photographers, and former palace employees who traded tips and information. Some operated legally on the edges of privacy laws. Others crossed ethical lines regularly. Robert reported this to his superiors and recommended a comprehensive review of palace security and information management. The royal family had been protected from one threat, but the appetite for private royal information remained enormous. Where there was demand, there would always be people willing to supply information through legal or illegal means. The Duchess was informed of Victor's arrest and confession. She remembered him from years of palace events and media encounters. He had always seemed professional and respectful. The betrayal felt personal. She requested a meeting with Margaret, wanting to understand how someone so trusted could be manipulated into such serious crimes. The meeting took place in a secure room, with legal representatives present. Margaret apologized tearfully, explaining how trapped she had felt and how ashamed she was of her actions. The Duchess listened quietly, her face showing disappointment rather than anger. She told Margaret that trust was the foundation of royal household service, and once broken, it could never be fully restored. However, the Duchess also acknowledged that Margaret had been victimized by Victor's manipulation. She would ensure that Margaret's cooperation with the investigation and her status as a blackmail victim would be presented during sentencing. The royal family did not seek revenge, only justice and improved security. Victor Hartley faced multiple serious charges, including blackmail, conspiracy to breach security, unauthorized access to confidential information, and violations of privacy laws. His legal team attempted to argue press freedom and public interest, but prosecutors demonstrated that his actions went far beyond journalism into criminal behavior. Margaret Sinclair was charged with security violations and unauthorized disclosure of confidential information. Because she had cooperated fully, been under duress, and showed genuine remorse, prosecutors recommended a reduced sentence. She would serve time in prison, but considerably less than Victor. The case attracted enormous media attention when it became public. The palace released a carefully worded statement, praising the security services for their vigilance and professionalism. They emphasized their commitment to protecting the privacy and safety of all royal family members. Details of what was found on the recording device and in the documents were never released publicly. James, Mitchell, and Sarah Brennan received commendations for their alertness and professional handling of the initial discovery. The security review they prompted led to significant improvements in royal protection protocols. New technologies were implemented to detect unauthorized devices. Background checks for palace employees were enhanced, and a new system was created for staff to report if they felt pressured or threatened by outside parties. Robert Hayes returned to Scotland Yard satisfied that the case was resolved, but aware of the larger implications. The royal family would always be targets for those seeking to exploit their fame and access their private lives. Security was not a one-time fix, but an ongoing challenge requiring constant vigilance. Victor Hartley's trial several months later resulted in a conviction on all charges. He received a substantial prison sentence and was ordered to pay compensation. His reputation was destroyed completely. The books and articles he had planned would never see publication. His scheme had cost him everything. Margaret Sinclair served 18 months in prison. Upon release, she left London and moved to a small town in Scotland where nobody knew her history. She found work in a local library and lived quietly, forever marked by her involvement in one of the most significant royal security breaches in recent years. The investigation officially closed, but its lessons remained. The royal household implemented the recommended security changes. Staff received new training on recognizing manipulation and reporting suspicious requests. The culture of trust was rebuilt carefully, with better protections for those who might be targeted by outsiders seeking insider information. 6 months after Victor Hartley's conviction, Windsor Castle had settled into a new normal. The security breach had shaken everyone, but it also brought positive changes that made the royal household stronger and safer. Security officer James Mitchell walked through the same garage where he had made his crucial discovery, noting all the improvements that had been implemented since that fateful morning. New scanning equipment now checked every vehicle daily for electronic devices. Advanced sensors could detect hidden transmitters, recording equipment, and GPS trackers that might be planted by hostile actors. The technology was expensive, but the royal family considered it a necessary investment after what had happened. James had been promoted to senior security coordinator, recognizing his exceptional vigilance. He now trained other officers in threat detection and awareness. His classes emphasized that security was not just about following procedures, but about trusting instincts and investigating anything that seemed even slightly wrong. The story he told new recruits about finding the scratch on the dashboard had become legendary within Royal Protection Services. It demonstrated that sometimes the smallest details revealed the biggest threats. James emphasized that they should never dismiss their concerns as paranoid or insignificant. Chief Inspector Sarah Brennan had implemented sweeping changes across all royal security operations. Background checks for new employees now included financial audits to identify anyone who might be vulnerable to pressure or bribery. The process was thorough but necessary. They could not afford another Margaret Sinclair situation. All palace staff now participated in quarterly security awareness training. These sessions taught them to recognize manipulation tactics, spot social engineering attempts, and report suspicious approaches from journalists or strangers asking for information. The training created a culture where speaking up about concerns was encouraged and rewarded. A confidential hotline was established where staff could report if they felt pressured or threatened. The hotline was managed by independent security professionals outside the royal household structure. This arrangement ensured that employees felt safe reporting problems without fear of losing their positions or being blamed for attracting unwanted attention. The Duchess had personally supported these reforms. She met with staff members to emphasize that their well-being mattered and that the household would protect them from exploitation. She shared that Margaret's case had taught everyone that vulnerability should be met with support, not judgment. The message resonated deeply with employees who had worried about their own past mistakes being used against them. Detective Robert Hayes had returned to his regular duties at Scotland Yard, but he maintained contact with royal security. He consulted on their new protocols and helped design their threat assessment procedures. His experience with the case had given him unique insights into how criminals might target the royal family. Robert had also written a classified report for government security services about the broader implications of the case. Victor Hartley's network of journalists and former palace employees who traded information represented an ongoing challenge. While most operated legally, the demand for exclusive royal stories created constant pressure on anyone with inside access. The report recommended stronger privacy laws and more severe penalties for those who obtained private information through deception or coercion. It also suggested international cooperation to combat the trade in stolen private information about public figures. Several countries were experiencing similar problems with celebrities and political figures being targeted by sophisticated information. Thieves.Parliament had responded by proposing new legislation that would make blackmail related to private information a more serious offense. The law would also create specific protections for employees of prominent families and organizations who might be targeted for information gathering. The royal case had highlighted gaps in existing laws that needed closing. Media organizations had reacted with mixed responses to the revelations about Victor Hartley. Some condemned him completely, emphasizing that his actions violated every principle of ethical journalism. Others worried that new laws might restrict legitimate investigative reporting. The debate highlighted ongoing tensions between privacy rights and press freedom. Several major news organizations had reviewed their policies on sourcing and information verification. They wanted to ensure they were not inadvertently encouraging or rewarding criminal behavior by paying for information that might have been obtained illegally. Industry groups developed new ethical guidelines for handling sensitive information about public figures. The Swiss bank that had managed Victor's accounts faced scrutiny from financial regulators. Questions were raised about whether they had properly investigated suspicious transactions. Banking secrecy laws protected client privacy, but they should not shield criminal activity. The case prompted discussions about balancing privacy with accountability in international banking. Back at the palace, life continued with new awareness and precautions. The Duchess resumed her full schedule of public appearances and charitable work. She maintained her natural warmth and accessibility, while accepting that additional security measures were necessary. She refused to let the security breach change her approach to connecting with people. Staff members adapted to the new security culture. Initially, some found the enhanced checks and frequent training sessions burdensome. But as they understood the reasons behind the changes and saw that the measures protected them as well as the royal family, acceptance grew. The household became more cohesive and security conscious. James Mitchell continued his daily patrols with renewed purpose. He knew his vigilance had prevented a serious breach and protected people he was sworn to serve. Other officers looked up to him, seeking his advice and trying to develop the same sharp observation skills that had made him notice that crucial scratch. One morning, while reviewing vehicle inspection reports, James found himself thinking about Margaret Sinclair. He wondered how she was managing in her new life away from London. He felt no anger toward her, only sadness that she had been trapped in such a terrible situation. Her story served as a reminder that security was not just about detecting threats but also about protecting vulnerable people from exploitation. Sarah Brennan felt satisfied with the reforms they had implemented, but new security was never finished. Threats evolved constantly, and protection services had to stay ahead of potential problems. She established a research unit to monitor emerging technologies and tactics that criminals might use to breach royal security. The research unit studied cases from around the world where public figures had been targeted. They analyzed methods used by hackers, social engineers, and information thieves. This intelligence helped them anticipate future threats and develop countermeasures before problems occurred. Technology companies were enlisted to help develop better detection systems. Silicon Valley firms provided advanced artificial intelligence tools that could monitor communications for patterns suggesting manipulation or coercion. These systems operated with strict privacy protections but could flag concerning situations for human review. The royal household also improved support services for employees facing personal difficulties. Financial counseling was offered to help staff manage money problems before they became crises. Mental health resources were expanded so people could seek help confidentially. These services aimed to reduce the vulnerabilities that had made Margaret susceptible to Victor's blackmail. International cooperation on royal security improved significantly. Security services from various countries with monarchies shared intelligence about threats and suspicious individuals. This network helped identify people who moved between countries targeting different royal families. The case involving Victor Hartley had demonstrated that such threats were not limited to one nation. Training programs were developed to help younger royals understand security challenges. They learned about social engineering, digital privacy, and how to spot people who might be trying to manipulate their staff or friends for information. This education started early, preparing them for lives under constant public scrutiny. The reforms transformed how the royal household operated. While maintaining traditions and accessibility, they incorporated modern security thinking and technologies. The balance was delicate but essential. The royal family needed to connect with people while protecting themselves from those who would exploit that connection. As the first anniversary of James's discovery approached, the royal household held a quiet ceremony, honoring everyone involved in the investigation. Awards were presented and lessons learned were reviewed. The event emphasized that security was everyone's responsibility and that vigilance had protected the institution they all served. The Duchess personally thanked James, Sarah, and the investigation team. She spoke about trust being precious and security being essential to maintaining the trust between the royal family and the public. She emphasized that the reforms were not about paranoia, but about responsible stewardship of an important institution. 2 years after the security breach, Windsor Castle hosted an international conference on protecting public figures in the digital age. Representatives from royal households, government security services, and privacy organizations gathered to share knowledge and develop best practices. The conference had been inspired directly by the lessons learned from the Victor Hartley case. James Mitchell stood at the back of the Grand Hall, watching as experts discussed the very incident he had helped uncover. Speakers referenced the dashboard discovery as a perfect example of how human vigilance remained essential, even with advanced technology. He felt proud but also humbled, knowing that luck had played a role alongside his training and instincts. The conference presentations revealed how widespread the problem had become. Every major royal family and many political leaders had experienced similar attempts to infiltrate their security and steal private information. The digital age made it easier for criminals to collect, store, and distribute sensitive material. Traditional security approaches needed updating for modern threats. One particularly interesting presentation came from a cybersecurity firm that specialized in protecting high-profile individuals. They explained how social engineering, the technique Victor Hartley had used against Margaret Sinclair, was becoming more sophisticated and harder to detect. Criminals studied their targets carefully, identified vulnerabilities, and exploited them with precision. The firm had developed training programs that used simulations to help staff recognize manipulation attempts. Employees participated in scenarios where actors played various roles trying to extract information or persuade them to violate protocols. These realistic exercises were far more effective than traditional classroom training. Sarah Brennan presented a case study on the Windsor incident to the conference. She detailed the investigation process, the security gaps that had been exploited, and the comprehensive reforms that followed. Her presentation was frank about mistakes made and lessons learned. The audience appreciated her honesty and asked numerous questions about implementation details. Other royal households sent representatives to Windsor after the conference to study their security systems directly. The British approach, combining technology with human judgment and strong support systems for staff, impressed many visitors. Several countries adopted similar programs, creating an informal network of security professionals who shared information regularly. Margaret Sinclair had rebuilt her life in Scotland, far from the media attention and shame of her past. She worked at the local library, lived in a small cottage, and volunteered at a community center helping people with literacy problems. Few knew about her history, and those who did respected her privacy and her evident desire to contribute positively to society. Margaret had written a letter to the Duchess 2 years after her release from prison. She expressed ongoing remorse and explained how the experience had changed her understanding of integrity and responsibility. The Duchess never responded directly, but through her private secretary, she acknowledged receiving the letter and wished Margaret well in her new life. The letter had prompted the Duchess to support a new initiative focused on rehabilitation for people who had made serious mistakes but showed genuine remorse. She believed strongly in second chances and redemption, values deeply rooted in her faith and personal philosophy. The program provided counseling, education, and employment assistance to help people rebuild their lives after serving sentences. Victor Hartley was serving his sentence at a medium security facility. Reports indicated he spent much of his time in the prison library, reading but no longer writing. Fellow inmates avoided him, knowing his crime involved betraying trust on a massive scale. Prison staff noted he appeared resigned to his circumstances and expressed no bitterness about his conviction. His family had distanced themselves from him after the trial. His adult children refused to visit or maintain contact. His ex-wife had changed her name to escape association with his notoriety. Victor had lost everything he valued in pursuit of money and recognition. a cautionary tale about the consequences of betraying trust for personal gain. The publishing industry had implemented new guidelines about acquiring potentially sensitive material. Publishers now conducted due diligence to verify that information was obtained legally and ethically. Several major houses had declined projects that seemed to rely on questionable sources or methods, even if the material would have sold well. Detective Robert Hayes had been promoted and now led Scotland Yard's unit focused on crimes against public figures and high-profile individuals. The unit investigated stalking, threats, information theft, and other crimes that traditional police divisions were not equipped to handle. His experience with the royal case had prepared him perfectly for this specialized work. Robert maintained regular contact with Windsor Castle security. He consulted on threat assessments and helped investigate suspicious incidents before they escalated into serious problems. This proactive approach had prevented several potential breaches over the past 2 years. The partnership between law enforcement and royal security had never been stronger. Technology continued evolving, creating both new threats and new protective capabilities. Artificial intelligence systems now monitored communications patterns around the royal family, flagging unusual activities for human review. Encryption protected sensitive communications. Biometric systems controlled access to secure areas. But human judgment remained the critical factor in effective security. James Mitchell had become an instructor at the Royal Protection Training Academy. He taught courses on observation skills, threat detection, and critical thinking. His students learned that security was not just about following rules, but about constantly evaluating situations and trusting their instincts when something seemed wrong. His favorite part of teaching was the practical exercises, where students had to identify subtle security risks in simulated environments. He would plant small clues that indicated potential problems and reward those who noticed them. Some exercises recreated the dashboard scratch scenario, teaching students to investigate minor anomalies thoroughly. The recording device recovered from the Duchess's vehicle was preserved as a training tool. Students examined it to understand how small and sophisticated modern surveillance equipment had become. The device reminded them that threats could hide anywhere, and that thorough inspections were essential. Sarah Brennan had written a book about security in the modern age, using the Windsor case as a central example without revealing classified details. The book became required reading for security professionals worldwide. She emphasized that protecting people required understanding their humanity, their vulnerabilities, and their need for both safety and privacy. The Duchess continued her public duties with grace and resilience. The security breach had not diminished her warmth toward people, or her commitment to charitable work. If anything, the experience had deepened her appreciation for the dedicated professionals who protected her family and the importance of treating all staff with respect and consideration. She occasionally thought about Margaret and hoped she had found peace in her new life. The Duchess understood that people made mistakes under pressure and deserved opportunities to demonstrate they could change. This compassion was one of her defining characteristics, admired by staff and the public alike. The anniversary of James's discovery passed quietly each year, marked internally by the security team as a reminder to remain vigilant. They reviewed the case file, discussed what had been learned, and reminded themselves that effective security required constant attention to detail and willingness to investigate anything unusual. 3 years after the incident, new security officers who had not experienced the original crisis joined the team. The story of the dashboard scratch was passed down like legend, teaching each generation of protectors about the importance of their work and the difference one observant person could make. The international network of royal security professionals that emerged from the conference continued meeting annually. They shared intelligence about emerging threats, new technologies, and effective practices. The Windsor incident had catalyzed global improvements in how public figures were protected from exploitation and privacy violations. Privacy laws in multiple countries had been strengthened based partly on lessons from the case. Blackmail involving private information now carried significantly harsher penalties. Journalists and publishers faced clearer legal boundaries regarding information acquisition. The balance between press freedom and privacy protection remained contentious, but the legal framework had improved. Windsor Castle stood as it had for centuries, adapting to each era's challenges while maintaining its essential character. The security breach had been a serious crisis, but the response demonstrated institutional resilience and capacity for reform. The royal household emerged stronger, more secure, and better prepared for future challenges. James Mitchell walked through the garage one morning during his regular patrol, his eyes scanning vehicles just as carefully as he had years before. The memory of that small scratch remained vivid, reminding him that vigilance could never lapse. Somewhere, someone might be planning another attempt to breach security, and the responsibility,